For over 3 centuries, from the 11th to the late 16th century, a pervasive and visceral dread gripped the kingdoms of Europe. It was a fear born of an unrelenting, seemingly unstoppable force emerging from the east, the Turkic warriors. Their advance, marked by swift conquests and devastating victories, cast a long, dark shadow across the continent, prompting desperate calls for crusades and igniting widespread panic. This wasn't merely a political rivalry, it was perceived as an existential threat to Christendom itself, an encroaching tide that seemed poised to engulf all of Europe. The initial rumblings of this distant threat began to echo across Europe with the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. This wasn't an Ottoman victory, but a decisive triumph for the Seljuk Turks over the Byzantine Empire. Manzikert shattered Byzantine power in Anatolia, opening the floodgates for Turkic migration and settlement. For Europeans, it was a distant but alarming signal. A formidable, unfamiliar power had arrived at the very doorstep of Christian civilization, demonstrating a military prowess that few could match. The vulnerability of the East was suddenly laid bare, igniting a new kind of anxiety. Following Manzikert, the Seljuk Sultanate established a significant presence, becoming a powerful and immediate neighbor to the fragmented remnants of Byzantium. This period saw the Turks consolidating their hold on Anatolia, a strategically vital region. European monarchs and the Pope began to grasp the scale of this new force. Reports of disciplined Seljuk warriors, their swift horse archery, and their relentless pressure on Christian lands fueled the burgeoning narratives of an alien and aggressive enemy. The Seljuks, though not yet the Ottomans, set the precedent for the sustained fear that would soon define relations with the East. From these early Seljuk roots emerged the Ghazi warriors, frontiersmen driven by a fierce religious zeal. Their aim was not merely conquest, but holy war, pushing the boundaries of Islam into Christian territories. These were not standing armies of a great empire, but dedicated, often fanatical, fighters operating on the fringes. Their raids were devastating, unpredictable, and relentless, striking terror into local populations. For Europeans, the Ghazi embodied a new, terrifying breed of warrior, one whose devotion to their faith made them appear utterly fearless and utterly merciless, expanding the notion of an existential religious conflict. Around 1299, a new and exceptionally ambitious leader, Osman I, founded what would become the Ottoman Empire. His small, but rapidly growing beylik, or principality, was strategically positioned on the Byzantine frontier. Osman skillfully harnessed the Ghazi spirit, directing it into organized campaigns of conquest. European chroniclers of the era quickly took note of this emerging power. The Ottomans were not just another group of raiders, they were building a state, absorbing other Turkic tribes and expanding rapidly. This marked a critical transition from sporadic incursions to a coherent, unified threat. The early Ottoman sultans systematically expanded their domain, pushing into the Balkans and across the Dardanelles into Europe. Their victories against fragmented Balkan states were swift and brutal, each one amplifying the growing sense of dread in Western Europe. Reports of entire regions falling under Ottoman rule, and their populations either converted, enslaved, or displaced, painted a grim picture. This wasn't merely border skirmishes, it was a wholesale remapping of the geopolitical landscape, a gathering storm that threatened to engulf the entire southeastern flank of Christian Europe, seemingly without end. The fear reached a new crescendo with the Battle of Nicopolis in 1396. A grand European crusade, comprising knights from Hungary, France, and other nations, was utterly annihilated by the Ottoman forces under Sultan Bayezid I. This wasn't just a defeat, it was a massacre, a humiliating blow to European pride and a stark demonstration of Ottoman military superiority. The scale of the loss, the sheer number of captured and executed knights, sent shockwaves across Europe. It solidified the image of the Ottomans as an invincible army, making calls for future crusades fraught with genuine terror. The repeated failures of European crusades against the Ottomans only intensified the fear. Each new expedition, launched with fervent hope and papal blessings, seemed to end in yet another devastating defeat. These losses were not just military setbacks, they were spiritual crises, shaking the faith of many and reinforcing the narrative of an almost supernatural enemy. calls for holy war often became calls for self-preservation, as the spectre of Ottoman invasion loomed larger with every European defeat, making future resistance seem increasingly futile and terrifyingly costly. The Ottomans were proving their dominance. The ultimate symbol of European vulnerability, and a moment of profound terror, arrived in 1453 with the fall of Constantinople. The ancient capital of the Byzantine Empire, a bastion of Christendom, succumbed to the forces of Sultan Mehmed II. The siege was a spectacle of overwhelming Ottoman power, massive cannons, ingenious tactics, and relentless assaults. When the city finally fell, it sent shockwaves throughout Europe. The second Rome was gone, replaced by the Ottoman capital of Istanbul. This event confirmed Europe's worst fears. The Ottomans were not just a regional threat, but an imperial power capable of achieving the impossible. Sultan Mehmed II, dubbed the Conqueror, embodied the terrifying ambition of the new Ottoman Empire. His ruthless efficiency, intellectual curiosity, and military genius were widely recognized and feared across Europe. He wasn't content with Constantinople. His sights were set on further expansion, even allegedly sketching plans to conquer Rome itself. His reputation for strategic brilliance and unyielding determination instilled a personal dread in European leaders, who saw in him an adversary unlike any they had faced. Mehmed II became the personification of the Ottoman threat, a living nightmare for Christendom. Central to Ottoman military success, and a major source of European terror, were the Janissaries. These elite infantry units, recruited through the infamous Devshirme system, were the cutting edge of the Ottoman army. They were fiercely loyal, impeccably disciplined, and incredibly effective in battle, especially with their early adoption of firearms. For Europeans, these warriors, taken as boys from Christian families and raised to fight for Islam, represented a chilling display of Ottoman power, the ability to turn their own children into their most formidable enemies. They were a symbol of both innovation and utter ruthlessness. The Devshirme system itself was perhaps one of the most feared aspects of Ottoman rule. This for-child Levi forcibly conscripted Christian boys from conquered territories, converted them to Islam, and trained them for service to the Sultan. Many became Janissaries, others rose to high administrative positions. For European families, it was a constant, looming threat. The state could seize their sons, transforming them into loyal servants of the very empire they feared. This systematic, institutionalized method of recruiting talent and maintaining loyalty was both horrifying and profoundly effective, creating an enemy that truly understood European ways. Another critical component of Ottoman military terror was their mastery of artillery and siege warfare. Long before many European powers, the Ottomans recognized the transformative power of gunpowder. Their colossal cannons, capable of breaching the strongest medieval walls, struck fear into any city contemplating resistance. The thunderous roar of their bombardments, combined with the sheer destructive force, left defenders demoralized and terrified. Cities that had stood for centuries suddenly seemed vulnerable. This technological superiority was a constant reminder of their military might, making prolonged resistance against them a suicidal prospect. The reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, from 1520 to 1566, marked the zenith of Ottoman power and consequently, the peak of European fear. Under Suleiman, the empire expanded dramatically, reaching its widest territorial extent. His campaigns were meticulously planned, his armies vast and well-equipped. He was a statesman, a lawgiver, and a brilliant military commander whose successes further cemented the image of the Ottomans as an indomitable force. For European monarchs, Suleiman was a formidable adversary, a grand sultan whose shadow loomed large over the entire continent, a constant and potent source of anxiety. The Battle of Mohacs in 1526 was another catastrophic European defeat that sent shivers down the spine of Christendom. Suleiman's forces utterly annihilated the Hungarian army, killing King Louis II and effectively ending Hungarian independence for centuries. This victory opened the path directly to Central Europe, exposing Austria and the Holy Roman Empire to immediate Ottoman threat. The speed and decisiveness of the Ottoman victory at Mohacs further cemented their reputation for military invincibility. It was a terrifying testament to their capacity for swift, total conquest, removing a major buffer state between the Ottomans and the West. The terrifying climax of Ottoman expansion into Central Europe came with the first siege of Vienna in 1529. Suleiman's massive army, fresh from Mohacs, advanced to the very gates of the Habsburg capital. For many Europeans, this was the ultimate test, the moment when Christendom itself hung in the balance. The fear was palpable: if Vienna fell, the road to the heart of Europe would be wide open. Though the Ottomans ultimately withdrew, the siege left an indelible mark on the European psyche, cementing Vienna as a front line of defense and the Ottomans as an ever-present, terrifying threat, capable of striking anywhere. Even when not engaged in full-scale sieges, the constant Ottoman raids into Hungarian and Austrian territories kept populations in a perpetual state of terror. These fast, brutal incursions targeted villages, farms, and smaller towns, plundering resources, taking captives, and sowing widespread destruction. The Ekingis, or irregular cavalry, were masters of these hit-and-run tactics. No border community felt truly safe. This persistent, low-level warfare created an enduring climate of anxiety and insecurity, a constant reminder of the Ottoman proximity and their willingness to inflict suffering at any time, anywhere. The fear wasn't confined to land. In the Mediterranean, Ottoman naval power, often operating through their Barbary pirate vassals, unleashed a new kind of terror. These corsairs raided European coastlines from Spain to Italy, kidnapping villagers for ransom or enslavement. Merchants lived in constant dread of their ships being captured, their crews killed or taken. The Barbary pirates created an atmosphere of pervasive insecurity across southern Europe, turning the sea, once a highway of commerce, into a perilous frontier where one's life and freedom could be lost in an instant. The maritime threat was as real as the land invasion. The Battle of Preveza in 1538 solidified Ottoman naval dominance in the Mediterranean for decades. Under the brilliant Admiral Hayreddin Barbarossa, the Ottoman fleet decisively defeated a combined Habsburg-Venetian force. This victory was a clear statement of Ottoman supremacy at sea, giving them unprecedented control over vital trade routes and increasing the vulnerability of European coastal regions. The prospect of an Ottoman navy operating with impunity further terrified European powers, limiting their ability to respond to land incursions and leaving their maritime commerce exposed to attack and disruption. Beyond military might, the Ottomans waged a sophisticated psychological war. Their banners, featuring the crescent moon, became symbols of dread. Whispers of their advanced tactics, their immense numbers, and their seemingly boundless resources spread like wildfire. The sheer terror of their name, the Turk, was a weapon in itself. European propaganda often demonized the Ottomans, portraying them as barbaric, infidel hordes bent on destroying Christian civilization. This demonization, while serving European political agendas, also amplified the genuine fear, depicting an enemy both militarily superior and morally abhorrent. The stark religious differences between the Islamic Ottoman Empire and Christian Europe were a foundational element of the fear. European narratives framed the conflict as a holy war, a clash of civilizations where the very souls of their people were at stake. The fear of forced conversion, the destruction of churches, and the imposition of a foreign faith deeply unsettled devout populations. This religious dimension transformed a geopolitical struggle into an apocalyptic one, making the Ottoman threat not just a matter of losing territory, but of losing one's identity, faith, and eternal salvation. This was a fear that permeated every level of society. What made the Ottoman threat so enduring was not just military prowess, but also their formidable administrative efficiency. Their ability to organize vast armies, sustain long campaigns, and effectively govern conquered territories was unparalleled. A centralized bureaucracy, efficient tax collection, and a system for integrating diverse populations allowed them to continually replenish their resources and manpower. For Europeans, this meant that even after a setback, the Ottomans could quickly regroup and return. This wasn't a fleeting barbarian horde, but a sophisticated, resilient empire, making their persistent threat all the more terrifying. The vast cultural differences further fueled European fear and misunderstanding. Ottoman dress, language, customs, and architecture were alien to most Europeans, breeding suspicion and xenophobia. Stereotypes of the cruel Turk became pervasive, reinforced by propaganda and the harsh realities of warfare. While the Ottomans often practiced a degree of toleration within their own diverse empire, this nuance was lost on fearful Europeans who primarily saw a foreign, encroaching power. This perception of an other, fundamentally different and potentially hostile, contributed significantly to the profound and long-lasting anxiety. The Republic of Venice and the Habsburg monarchy bore the brunt of the Ottoman advance for centuries. Venice, a maritime power, constantly struggled to defend its Adriatic and Aegean possessions, engaging in numerous costly wars against the Ottomans. The Habsburgs, as rulers of Austria and Hungary, were the primary land barrier. Their constant struggle against the Ottoman Empire defined much of their foreign policy and drained their resources. These nations lived in a state of perpetual alert, their borders and coastlines under constant threat, making the Ottoman presence a daily, terrifying reality, not a distant rumor. In response to the relentless Ottoman threat, Europe embarked on a massive effort to construct and upgrade fortifications. Across Central and Southeastern Europe, old castles were reinforced, and new, star-shaped bastions designed to withstand cannon fire were built. Cities like Vienna, Budapest, and Belgrade became symbols of this desperate defensive posture. These fortifications were costly, both in terms of resources and lives, but they were seen as the only bulwark against the Ottoman tide. They stood as tangible monuments to Europe's profound fear, stark reminders of the ever-present danger. The call for crusades against the Ottomans persisted for centuries, a testament to the enduring fear. While often failing militarily, these calls served to galvanize European identity, uniting disparate Christian kingdoms against a common, terrifying enemy. Popes and emperors repeatedly invoked the threat of Ottoman conquest to rally support, emphasizing the existential nature of the conflict. The very concept of a crusade evolved, shifting from liberation of the Holy Land to the defense of Europe itself, underscoring how deeply the Ottoman menace had permeated European consciousness and reshaped its collective sense of purpose. Defending against the Ottomans came at an immense economic cost for European powers. Maintaining large armies, building fortifications, and supporting naval fleets drained treasuries and stifled economic development in many border regions. Taxes were raised, loans were taken, and trade was disrupted. For centuries, a significant portion of Europe's resources was diverted to simply holding back the Ottoman tide. This constant economic burden, fueled by the imperative of survival, was another manifestation of the pervasive fear, impacting the daily lives and long-term prosperity of millions, trapping them in a cycle of defensive spending. In 1571, the Battle of Lepanto offered Europe a rare and much-needed moment of triumph and respite from the overwhelming fear of Ottoman naval power. A Holy League fleet, primarily Spanish and Venetian, decisively defeated the main Ottoman fleet. It was a massive naval engagement, and the victory was celebrated across Europe as a miracle. While it didn't end the Ottoman threat or their land expansion, Lepanto broke the myth of Ottoman invincibility at sea. For a time, it offered a glimmer of hope that the tide could indeed be turned, though the deep-seated fear of the Ottomans would persist for decades to come. Even after Lepanto, and as the Ottoman Empire gradually began to recede from its zenith, the psychological impact of 300 years of terror lingered. Generations of Europeans had grown up under the shadow of the Turk, shaping their worldview, their art, and their literature. The image of the formidable Ottoman warrior, the fear of enslavement, and the threat of invasion remained deeply ingrained in the collective consciousness. It was a shared trauma that bound many European peoples together, defining an entire era and influencing the development of national identities in opposition to this persistent Eastern threat. Though outside the traditional 300-year peak of fear, the Second Siege of Vienna in 1683 reignited Europe's old terrors with a vengeance. While ultimately a decisive defeat for the Ottomans, it showed that even after a century of perceived decline, the empire could still mount a massive, terrifying offensive at the heart of Europe. The scale of the siege and the desperation of the defense brought back the chilling memories of Suleiman's advance. Its eventual relief, a grand European victory, finally began to break the spell of Ottoman invincibility, but only after one last, powerful resurgence of fear. The story of the Turkish warriors who terrified Europe for 300 years is not merely one of military conquests and defeats. It is a profound narrative of fear, a fear that shaped borders, inspired crusades, spurred technological innovation, and profoundly influenced the cultural and psychological landscape of a continent. The Ottoman Empire, in its relentless expansion and military might, became the other against which European identity was often forged. The shadow of the crescent moon, once a symbol of dread, became an undeniable part of Europe's historical memory, a testament to the power of a formidable, and often terrifying, adversary.